Welcome to Sculpture Vulture. I'm Lucy Branch, a sculptural conservator and author, bringing you a series of interviews with some amazing sculptors who inspire me, and I hope will do the same for you. You can see the photographs accompanying the interview, the episode show notes, and get a free novel from sculpturevulture.co.uk. Hello Sculpture Vultures, and thank you for joining me. Today I'm interviewing Amy Goodman, who's transferred her love for horses into a passion. You'll find her works all around the UK, Colchester, Silverstone, Aldershot, to name just a few. She works in bronze and steel, and her style is wide-ranging, from the more traditional portraits to more fluid abstracts. I can't decide which of her works I love the most, but without exception, they all have movement and character in the subject matter. I began our discussion today by asking her if she'd always been creative.
Yes, I've always loved art. I've always loved drawing and painting and making things, and also resolving ideas in 3D. I was always making sculptural objects, animals, horses from a really young age. I always loved to challenge myself with making really complicated things as well. And nature's always fascinated me. So really, it's even though I was academic as well, I always gravitated to the arts. And when I sort of later on in school got to the GCSE and A-level phase, art, pottery, sculpture, those are the subjects
Fantastic.
That I naturally went into.
Was there somebody, a role model at home that kindled that interest, or was it just that it came to you from goodness knows where?
I think it was always in me. My mum could draw. My mum could get a likeness of things, and I believe my grandfather, who I didn't know very well, he could paint, and in his spare time, quite a talented painter. But really, it was something that I'd always just gravitated to and had an affinity with. I always got accused of always watching. I think I was a natural observer. I loved to kind of watch what was going on around me and maybe sort of get it down and record it. And, for example, when I was 15, I sort of, in my pottery classes, always loved to stay after school and late into the evening, and I just was, fascinated by it. And, I made a George and the Dragon with wings outstretched, and George with the lance for the poor dragon, and I had to make the most complicated things possible, and I loved that challenge. I loved kind of, I think you have to sort of be an engineer in a way. You've got to think about balance and center of gravity, although I didn't have words for them then, but you've really got to know about balance of form and volume and how they relate to each other to have a successful freestanding sculpture.
Myself, I spent all my youth doodling when I should have been listening to my teachers in lessons, clearly, but trying to draw horses. And although I must have done tens of thousands of them, they're such difficult creatures as well. I mean, dragons as well, but horses, to get that balance right, it's no mean feat. And actually to do it at a young age, when I don't know if our cognitive skills and go through to our hands, the dexterity is quite as good as you are as an adult. I don't know, that sounds like it was quite a natural, must have been a natural thing.
I think so. And you've sort of reminded me that I did obsessively draw horses, and I was very, very lucky to ride when I was younger and growing up, and I was very lucky to have, be in a family, and we did have horses and ponies in our life. And so when you're sort of around them and grooming them and riding, and you sort of have a, good idea about their form, how they're put together. But for me, just drawing them, that was always my obsession. And yes, they are an incredibly challenging animal to portray. And, they have been there since the beginning of time, with horses, dogs and man have kind of evolved together, and they have been instrumental in our histories. It's incredible that these majestic animals do what they do for us. It's absolutely amazing, and they are incredible.
More formally, or was it something that came to you later?
So after completing my A-levels, I went on to do a fine art degree in Southampton, and when you do a foundation course, you're experimenting, you're trying out different media. But I specialised in sculpture in my final year, and it's just something I naturally gravitated to. I was always problem solving. I would kind of work out ideas in my head. I wouldn't need to have reams and reams of sketchbooks full of my drawings, although drawing is an incremental part. For me, a lot of it is in my head, and I've already kind of been thinking about a subject, researching it, and I've done a lot of problem solving just in my head. And for example, when I weld my steel pieces, which I guess you could describe as 3D drawings, I naturally can put the shapes together. And even when I've got two pieces of metal which represent front legs and hind legs, and then a single piece which is neck down the spine to tail, I can already see the whole animal just in those three pieces. I already, and again, being surrounded by resource material, having anatomical books, to see what's going on under the surface. I surround myself with that too. And it's an exciting process. And I think every time I make something, I'm learning, and I want to sort of take that on into the next project.
With the commissions, tell me where you find your inspiration to bring something fresh to the project.
I think what I do is, as soon as I sort of know the brief and the subject, then I'll do a lot of research to really try and get a rounded overview of the subject and the brief. I also sometimes check out how perhaps it's been approached before by other creatives, and then I want to try and give it a new angle. Also thinking about composition with sculpture, you really want it to be working in the round. So thinking about that as well.
Yeah, I really do see your personality come through with your sculpture. Like it's almost like your own handwriting or something. It's got such a distinctive style.
I mean, for example, with Pegasus and Bellerophon, there's already been some very striking sculptures created of them. And I very much wanted to hark back to the ancient Greek sculpture, and that's why I wanted to get the verdigris in there. I wanted to sort of create this timeless feel. So, going back to the grandmasters and ancient sculpture, it's a great reference point.
Yeah, no, I really want that one. Please, can I have one of those? So do you ever hit a rut with a project? Have you had to work yourself out of it?
What I sometimes find between projects, I find it difficult to kind of really spur myself to get myself thrown into the next project. But often in the middle of a project, as you might suggest, sometimes, I'll go through a stage where I'm really hating what I'm doing. And quite often I will go into it and make extreme changes, so even getting into cutting into the armature. And I think it's important to be really critical, sometimes to have space from a project, work on something else and come back to it, and then you'd see it with fresh eyes. Also, getting a colleague perhaps to have a look as well, a fresh pair of eyes is always helpful. And then you then think, oh my gosh, that's not right, or actually it might be better if I try this. And particularly with something like clay, I think there is always that possibility to change it. I also love the tactile nature of it. I love to have lots of texture in the surface and give it life. And I think it's important to never be afraid to change something. If you're sort of thinking, that's not quite right, do change it, because otherwise it's going to be there for all time.
Yeah, the only thing is the idea of cutting into the actual armature. I mean, you're really doing massive change at that stage. It's not just a surface rework. No.
I mean, sometimes something can be moved around on the surface, but occasionally it's worth doing that. I mean, with my steel pieces, it's easier to do that, but still it's quite physical, and you go 2 steps back before you go forwards again. But it can be part of the process, and I think it's important. I quite like the way that a piece evolves as you're working on it. I like to work intuitively. So, scaling up from a maquette, often I find that the final piece evolves and changes, and I think that's a good thing.
Well, I mean, with your steel sculptures as well, there's nowhere to hide, is there? Because the line is it's everything. And could there have been a different life for you other than the one that you've chosen?
Well, I loved sort of zoology and biology. So working with animals in some form, I think I would have loved to have been a scientist or something, or zoologist, traveling around the world. Travel is great. You know, when I think about the year after I graduated, instead of getting my backpack on, I had an opportunity to work at a photographic safari lodge in Zimbabwe, and that was so inspirational. But I think really my art encapsulates that, and I think it was always something in me. So maybe I would have worked with animals in some way, but it comes into my work, and also the figuration, the human figure, the life, what's under the surface. You know, we're living, breathing things with pumping hearts and muscles, and maybe that comes through. So in a way, I think art can be whatever subject you want it to be, and I think always learning and you know, trying to push yourself.
Yeah, so the
Is very
animal
important.
aspect particularly, though, would have probably appealed to you, whatever you did. It would have called
Yes,
to you.
it would have done, and you know, I was that 6 months working in the Guai Valley on just next to Wangi National Park.
Wow, that's quite a long time, 6 months.
It was, so that was back in 99, 2000, before, you know, Zimbabwe's been having so many problems. But for me to be there immersed in that wildlife, it was just such a magical experience. And I just learnt so much about the flora, fauna and the animals. I learnt the Latin names. I was able to actually do local game drives when I got to know the nature well. And it was such a brilliant experience. And I did a lot of art there. I sketched from life. I did my photography, and it led to a 2-woman show in St Helier, Jersey when I came back, and my subject matter was all African wildlife, and I'd love to revisit that. I'd love to make a majestic kudu again. I'd like to, you know, it's interesting at the moment. My work is, you know, I'm still doing the equestrian and the military is coming in, but I think I would also like to go back to my original passion, really. And I think that always is part of me, trying to capture the majesty of wildlife.
And so would you encourage other creatives, other artists, well, people thinking about becoming a sculptor maybe, to not necessarily just limit themselves to perfecting their sculptural craft, but to go outside of that, go a bit bigger?
I think it's up to the individual. You know, I've got some of my colleagues at project workshops. They very much have honed one particular technique and they've become masters at it, and actually that fits for them. I just happen to love to diversify and work in different media, but I think everyone has their own path, and I think experimentation is part of it to find who you are, because I think as an artist you are and it's a cliche, but you're finding yourself too through the experience of also the challenge of trying to make a living out of your passion. And you know, I've gone through debt, major debt and recession, and you have to dig deep. So, you know, sometimes the gleam of making work you love when you're desperate to try and pay the bills or pay off some debt, you have to dig deep. And I think anyone in any business, you know, you have to stretch yourself, and you know,
there's real bravery in that, actually, because that's the thing that makes so many people falter, isn't it, from the creative life. It's incredibly difficult. I think you have to be incredibly creative, actually, to be able to make a living out of it. Because it's such a difficult thing to find the clients and to bring to bring your voice across in such a way that people are prepared to pay an awful lot of money for large scale works, particularly.
I think it's a whole combinations of things, you know, and things falling into place at the right time, luck, hard work, tenacity, believing in yourself, even though all of us as creative have lots of times of self-doubts, and you think, oh gosh, you know, but you have to sort of be driven, and you have to believe in what you do, and find your niche, because there are so many other contemporaries out there, but you find your niche and establish yourself and gain in confidence. And sometimes you hit some rocky roads and it's difficult, but you just have to keep yourself going. And for me, I think it was diversifying, making the steel work. Winchester University, I must mention them, because, you know, 2008 through to 2011, I arrived at project workshops at the beginning of the recession. Things were hard. car engine blew up, I got into very serious debt, and I thought, how am I going to carry on? But I just knew this is what I wanted to do. And so, I taught a bit. I started running drawing classes. I did steel work. I just diversified, and also got myself out to art fairs and shows, and you have the overheads of that, but it also gets people to know your work. So there's a lot of hard work getting yourself established. But
I think Jen Sincero, the author, she says, when you really want something, that's when the universe is going to test you. You're going to get run over by a bus. You're going to get all your money taken away within a couple of days. You're completely broke. But that's the test. If you really want it, you're going to go over, and then the universe is on your side, maybe a bit more.
It's funny how that happens. I just knew when I was at that rock bottom that, no, I am going to do this. I'll find a way. And I also felt quite lucky that I was surrounded at Project Workshop's a special place with other creatives, and we were all on the same journey and similar struggles, so I at least didn't feel like I was completely on my own. And obviously a lot of creatives find themselves, it's quite a solitary existence, so I found it helpful to have people I could talk to, and you didn't feel so alone. But I think Winchester University, I was approached about creating an angel for them, and I actually won. I was one of 3 finalists, and I created this bronze in 2012, and they then almost became a patron and bought my other work as well. And so I'm still their artist in residence, and I've made a second angel for them, and I felt that they supported me and came along at a good time too, and that's very important to mention, and they're a lovely team there. So again, I think, like you said, if you really want something and you're focused, and you maybe have a visualization of where you want to be, then you can kind of, events transpire, you grab those opportunities when you present themselves, and you go for it, and you're unswerving. Sometimes things fall in the right place, sometimes they don't, but I feel lucky I'm still here doing this. It's great. Really difficult.
Tell me a little bit about whether you have a process with your work. Do you get up every morning and do the same routine before going into the studio, or meditate?
I think recently we have been living through these surreal times, so surreal. My routine is quite different. Normally, before COVID, I would sort of get up. I've got a lovely greyhound with my husband. I would take him for a lovely walk, do my admin at home on the computer, and then I would sort of get into the studio probably for around 10, and then I would sort of do my 10-hour day. And sometimes I might be making design work for a piece. I might be making a maquette, a scale model. Perhaps if I'm lucky enough to be working on a life-size piece or a memorial for a client, I'm working out my ideas on a small scale before I then enlarge. Again, I'm lucky because I've got a foundry on site where I rent my studio. So if I've got perhaps editions of pieces going through there, I might spend a day working on a wax, which is then dipped in ceramic, invested, and before the casting stage, the exciting bronze casting stage. So sometimes I quite often have several projects on the go if I'm lucky at different stages. And when I, for example, in sort of on the larger scale work front, from the point of first inquiry to the actual delivery and installation, unveiling of a piece, it can often be a number of years, or at least 1 or 2 years. So I'm sort of mixing my time between obviously the boring admin side of a business to the mulling over of ideas for a new inquiry that's come in, to working through current projects. And I'm quite good at sort of multitasking. But then, for example, when I'm up to deadline, I think all of us work well under deadline. I certainly do. So if I've sort of perhaps got a week left to work on a monumental piece, and for example, a life-size horse will normally take me a couple of months. I'm about to, lucky for me, I'm about to start a life-size Gurkha from World War I, carrying an injured soldier off the battlefield. And I'm going to be starting them in about 10 days' time. And I will probably spend 10 days welding up a very secure armature, because it's probably going to have 300, 400 kilos of clay on it. So I've got that. I need to really take my time to measure from my scale model. I work out a ratio of measurement to scale up from my small piece. And then the clay, I would imagine it's going to be quite a complex piece. So I think it'll take me about 2 to 2.5 months to do that. So when I am at final stages of making such a piece, I can then push myself to work 12-hour days quite happily.
Gosh, there's 2 parts to that. I totally cannot believe that you're working creatively for 10 hours or maybe 12 at a stretch.
It's not every day. What I do is I kind of have a momentum most of the time, and I work sort of normal hours, be it perhaps at hours that I'm lucky enough to be able to arrange for myself. So I don't always do the 9 to 5. Sometimes I'll go in the studio later, but then I'll work later. And also I quite often, like a lot of people who work for themselves, do a lot of admin and, stuff on the computer in the evenings. So, you're never really switching off from your work, even when you leave the workshop. But when I'm up to deadline, then I can push myself and work very, very long hours if I have to. And that's when I almost go into... that's when I can lose myself, because you're pushing yourself and you have that pressure, and that's almost, I thrive under that sometimes, but I couldn't do those 12-hour days every day.
No,
and
goodness.
But it seems to be the way, I can not buy, I say bide my time, but I'm working steadily, and then I kind of almost need that final impetus to really push myself. I also find that when I'm between big projects, I go through this stage of berating myself that I can't immediately throw myself into the next one. But actually it's necessary for me to recharge. And even when I'm recharging, I'm absolutely thinking all the time about that new project. Yeah. And I think it's just, I've been doing this, I graduated how many years ago now? 23 years ago. And I think even now I'm just beginning to get used to my creative nature and what works for me.
Yeah.
But I just feel really grateful to do this, and I love it so much.
Well, you can see it in your work completely. I think that's probably why you're empty at the end of your creative project, because you've put so much into it. No wonder you have to recharge again, because no one could sustain that. When I was looking at your pieces, I wondered if you had a special connection with the armed forces somehow, because obviously you seem to have quite a lot of sculptures that have that connection.
You know what, it happens organically, because I always was an animalia artist and sculptor, particularly horses, the equine. The dream of making a life-size horse came back in 2014 when I had the honour of creating, the Romsey Warhorse and Trooper.
Yeah.
And that happened to just be about, a World War I horse and trooper. And it wasn't the military that commissioned me. It was a group of local people to Romsey from all walks of life who very passionately felt there should be a memorial to the fallen from World War I. And I did a lot of work on that before I won the commission, but it's just... I absolutely was tunnel visioned about it. When I heard there was a possibility of a warhorse being commissioned, it was my dream. I'd always loved Michael Morpurgo and Warhorse, and also Jack Seeley and Warrior and their story. And when that happened, it not only was my first life-size horse, it was also a pretty major memorial and a lot of pressure to do it justice. So it was scary pressure, but also I seem to love it too. I kind of really enjoyed that challenge, and I wanted to do the best job I could. So I think in terms of a project that means a lot to me, I think that was my first really major commission, and I got to know a lot of the local community to Romsey, got involved with fundraisers. It was very close to my heart. And in answer to your question, because I'm sorry, I do keep going off a little bit, I think that's caught the attention of some military clientele. So a short time after, I was approached by Stephen Ashton to do a life-size memorial to Trio, who is a military dog that sniffed out IEDs in Afghanistan. And because I share the making of these works on social media, he had been following that project, and he approached me and said, "We'd love you to make Trio."
Oh, brilliant.
And from that, I was shortlisted to 3 to make Pegasus and Bellerophon for Merville Barracks in Colchester. So it just happened organically. And I think then you build your portfolio, you meet people. I love sharing my work with people, and it's just happened organically.
Although I'm an enormous bronze lover, as you know, you do a lot of sculpture in steel as well. What do you get from steel that you don't get from bronze?
I think the steel pieces are something, I still am making them. More recently, I've been casting more bronzes, so I've been loving the quality and the patinas and the finishes you can get with bronze. But I think I like to sketch with steel in a way. I love to, there's this dead material on the floor, and I like to give whatever medium I work with life. And they're 3D sketches, but the thing is they're made out of cold bent 10 millimeter steel bars, so it's incredibly physical. So it's actually quite a workout making them too. And it's something that I started from art college, making these things, and I've had a number of commissions, and when you sort of hot dip galvanize them silver, they're a blank canvas for lighting at night, so they're quite magical when you lit and when they're lit up. And also I would love to have a show one day where I have an installation with maybe quite a few of these pieces with incredible lighting in a Spartan gallery, because the shadows that can be cast are quite something. They become another piece of work in themselves. And I'd also like to work more mixed media, and with translucent reflective stainless steel mesh, you can create something new to this drawn 3D medium. And I think as an artist, you want to do the mix between having the ability to make your own work and explore and experiment with commissioned work, because we all have to pay the bills. And more recently, I've felt very fortunate that I've been working on public memorial sculpture, which was always my dream, and I can't believe it's happening. But alongside that, I have also got ideas for what I'd like to do in terms of experimentation and going out of my comfort zone. And as we touched on earlier, also maybe working with architects to perhaps doing some more interior-based stuff with the steel, But I think sometimes in life you have a fixed idea of where you might go, and then you go in a totally different new direction, but that's absolutely brilliant and okay, because I think you have to kind of if you don't have an idea of the sort of pieces you want to make in your mind, you can't get there. But sometimes, you'll have a catalyst that happens that pushes you into a new direction. That's exciting.
And so if you could name your spot, where would you like to see one of your pieces? Would it be an institution or outdoors?
You know what, the Romsey Warhorse project was very dear to me, and I had this idea. I would have loved to have seen a 3D hologram of this horse and soldier in the Tate. I would have loved to have. Loved to have had a 3D scan and had this hologram, these ghosts from the past temporarily there at this exhibition. I would have loved to have seen that happen. So I think some of our incredible galleries such as that, or the Royal Academy, it would be amazing to be in there one day. I'd love to have a piece in London, but really, let's just see. I mean, there's lots of places in the world which would be incredible.
Well, if you'd like to tell everyone where they can find out more about you.
Okay, well, my website is amy@amygoodman.co.uk. I'm Amy Sculptor 1 on Instagram, and I think is it Amy Sculptor on Twitter. But I quite often share time lapses of what I'm doing, and I love to share the creative process with people.
Fantastic. And is Instagram be your preferred social media, or is there
actually
another?
Facebook.
Facebook.
Facebook.com/Amy Sculptress. That's so Facebook and Instagram, I think, really they're probably are good places to see, as well as my website. Oh, and I forgot to say, I've got 3 life-size horses that hopefully, once lockdown's properly lifted, will be unveiled later this year near Reading. So that's an exciting.
Fabulous. Are they in a public space in Reading?
They're on the site of the old Arborfield Garrison. Cress Nicholson, the client, wanted to commission a piece relating to the history of the site. And there was once a horse hospital and remount depot depot in World War One there, and so one of my horses is a rearing gunner, free of his tack. This war horse is free of his tack after being in war, and there's a sports horse mare and yearling ahead, so it's kind of past, present, future in an equine installation. So that's happening later on this year.
Fantastic. Amy, thank you for talking to us today,
you.
and hope to speak to you again soon. I promise to try to stop myself gushing too much about Amy, but I really do think she's something special. I often compare humans to horses, and my husband doesn't get it at all because he's not a horse lover, but I hope you'll go with me with this analogy. To me, Amy's the human equivalent of a Grand National winning horse, talented beyond the usual, big-hearted and with stamina in spades. If you've ever needed a roadmap of how to be successful in a creative industry, I think Amy just gave us it. She's covered all the pillars that I would include: her passion for the work, which fuels it all, and her ability and talent for it, which she didn't focus on too much, obviously, being very humble, but she does show such an incredible range in her work. It really is staggering. If you take the time to have a look at the pictures, you'll see exactly what I mean. And even though she's produced some astonishing sculpture at this point in her life, I'm not even sure we've seen the best of her yet. And then there's that dogged persistence which she's shown right from the early days of wanting to live this creative life and being prepared to shake down to do it. Debt, scrabbling around doing jobs to support her creative work in the early days. She really has been committed to it from the very beginning. And she doesn't leave out two less practical but no less valuable parts of the picture. Gratitude, to start. She knows that she's fortunate to make a living doing something that she loves, but at the same time she hints that it's not all swanning around, shaping a little bit of clay here and there. There's some serious stamina that's involved, periods of 10-hour stints in the studio to support her journey, and also the other aspect of that ability to visualise clearly not only the creations that she's coming up with, but what she wants in her career too, so that she's able to go out and get it and make it happen. Last of all, I think she's shown us that she's not an island. She's made herself part of a creative community, and she's invested in that and taken trouble over the relationships in her life that also involve her clients, sharing her work, but also she's not just stood on the sidelines with projects. She gets her sleeves rolled up and tries to help as much as she can to ensure that the projects go forward, whether that's fundraising or doing talks or anything that she can do to support them. So you're sure to find an Amy Goodman statue not too far away from you if you live in the UK. I do encourage you to go out and see one of her works on a weekend or any moment that you've got free. And please don't leave me out of this lovely journey. If you've discovered her through the podcast, please tweet me, give me a statue selfie, and I'd love to see those pictures coming in. Please tweet me at AntiqueBronze1. Coming up in the next full interview will be sculptor Hugh Chapman on the 10th of November. His graceful and elegant forms are sure to captivate you. I've always struggled to meditate, something I find incredibly difficult, but his statues without fail take me to a quiet place. His forms are otherworldly and abstract, bold and dynamic, and which are choreographed for light and contrast. Do join me for what will be a great discussion with a genuinely nice chap. If you're looking for a new book, please consider one of my novels about the dark side of the art world, where sculpture is always at the heart of the story. You can get them on the show website, on the usual online retailers, or even better, keep your local library alive, ask for them in there. Thank you for joining me today. Sculpture Vulture has been brought to you by Antique Bronze.